This is Noise from the Cranium. My name is Doug, and in this episode I'm going to conclude my interview with collector singer Howie Vickers. After all the appearances on Let's Go, the band were used to being on TV, so appearing on Hugh Hefner's Playboy After Dark was something that they would be very familiar with doing. They got to mingle with the crowd and chat with Hugh briefly.
Excuse me a minute, I'll see if I can get the collectors to maybe entertain us a little bit.
Howie?
Oh, yeah. Good to see you. Looks like the boys are all set with the instruments in hand, and we wonder if we could maybe get you to play a little bit.
Be glad to.
You're all from Canada.
Vancouver, British Columbia, that's right.
How long's the group been together?
About a year and a half now.
Well, you're laying down some real wild sounds, and
Thank you very much.
I'd like to hear a little bit.
Be glad to. This first tune's called One Act Play.
Okay.
They performed a lip sync of Lydia Purple and this live rendition of One Act Play, which they nailed.
Are you sleeping? Are you still sleeping? No, it's not important now. It doesn't matter anyhow. Go back to sleep now. Are you sure you're warm enough? No, it's not time to get up. Just go to sleep now. No, it's nothing. I said nothing. The same thing happens every night. We go to sleep, we never fight. What is happening? What is that? Oh no, what have I done to you? Why do I do the things I do? Why do I do it? I've been thinking, stayed awake all night. I wanted to say this just fine, but there's no way. What can I say? There's no way, because we're in the one act play.
Following the release of the album, they continued gigging to support and promote it.
Well, they thought we were going to be the next Doors, I think, because, you know, there was similarities. And when we played the Whiskey, the whole side was our album. I mean, that had never been. And there was billboards on Sunset.
Their newfound success also got them a deal with acoustic amps.
A guy named Keith Steen. Keith was working at the plant where they were making those in L.A. Jack would have got us in. So us and the Doors had the first acoustic amps as they laid them on us, as you know, because they thought, they were right about the Doors, but which is so ironic. They weren't acoustic; they were transistor, and they were the loudest amps. Glenn Miller, our bass player, was 90 pounds soaking wet, right? And he, as was the fashion, he had bell bottoms, right? Swear to God. The bass amps, his two 18-inch speakers, we played so loud and those amps were so loud, I would look over and he's standing in front of his amp and his pants are flat.
Wow.
Yeah. And I never had earplugs. We had little or no monitors, and it's just amazing that I can hear to this day.
Yeah.
Standing out in front of all that, as the singer.
At the time, Canada was split musically between what was going on in Eastern Canada versus the scene that was happening on the West Coast.
Windsor, Ontario is across from Detroit.
Yes.
So you'd have one of the Windsor stations playing the heck out of, say, These Eyes was the Guess Who's first success. And Detroit hears it, and the ties then particularly went north-south. If you're in Toronto, it's going south Detroit, and maybe if you're lucky in New York, whatever. Ours went down the coast, down through Seattle, Frisco, Frisco particularly, in the LA.
That was no more evident than when they played the Fillmore East.
It was mostly blues bands. I mean, literally, in a lot of cases, whether it was a Fillmore or whatever. And then there was, the odd group like us, and there was really nobody doing what we were doing. I mean, White Rabbit and all that shit, was the Airplane. Far more R&B, blues kind of oriented, that way. Coming out of Toronto, same thing. It's not a coincidence that David Clayton Thomas and that kind of stuff was going on. Mandela and all that, that was their sound, that was their thing, right? So, and our thing, Frisco, that they were ready for it.
The band also had a particular vision of what they recorded versus what they played live.
But
that whole
we never did perform our singles, that was like there's AM kind of thing there, and mainly one of the main reasons of writing and doing the suite was the for us anyway, the gap between what we were trying to do with the singles and the audience, where the gigs were. Like, you can't go, going into Fillmore and playing Lydia Purple, I don't think that's going to work.
Right.
So we wanted something that we could perform that had some flexibility to it, which it did, so it's got a structure, but within that we could stretch out when it was our part of it, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just literally note for note, right? But it was organized enough so that was part of what how we arrived at where we did. So we would have a performance piece that would work in that context, in that venue, right? Whether it was a Fillmore or wherever we were, right?
In their heyday, the Collectors played with a lot of the big name acts of the day.
We played the Doors about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Victoria here and a couple of places in LA area, and just pretty much everybody, because between the Fillmores and whether it was Iron Butterfly or whether it was Rod Stewart and Jeff.
Do you recall what maybe one of your bigger venues might have been, or if you played?
Well, the biggest crowd we had, I guess, was it was on their last tour, Cream, in Oakland.
Oh, Oakland. Oh.
So 18,000 people. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
That would have been great.
We opened for Cream. We could hear them fighting in their dressing room.
The band's North American success was starting to spill over into Europe.
Apparently, people would come back from having been there and say, "You guys got to get over there.
Yeah.
You're huge," or whatever. Yeah. Germany was another location. There was some in Britain as well, but Holland, particularly, yes.
Yeah.
For some, and there was a group called Focus, I think.
Yeah.
That they claimed us as a. I think a lot of it, the falsetto stuff and that we did. I think they had a flute as well, which
yes, they did.
Claire did flute on a couple of our things and that. So that influence makes sense in that sense. But they were big in Holland as well. So,
according to the Vancouver Sun, in January 1969, the first Collectors album had surpassed 40,000 in sales and was selling well in the UK. In fact, British music paper Melody Maker chose the debut Collectors album as one of the top 10 albums of the 1960s. In the summer of 1968, through a Bill Henderson connection with Vancouver Playhouse artistic director Joy Coghill, they got involved with playwright George Riga. According to Howie,
that came along as a project.
Okay.
With George Riga had written this musical, basically, so the lyrics were all his.
Yes.
And it was just this idea of, hey, let's and collectively we were again involved in putting the music together.
Yeah.
But that was a thing unto itself. All the lyrics were from the play that we did live, actually, for a few weeks in Vancouver at the Playhouse.
Working with Riga, the band hammered out arrangements and went back to LA to work on their next album. After recording a few songs from the play, producer Hassinger thought the music from the play would be a good concept album. Grass and Wild Strawberries was released on January 3rd, 1969. One single, Early Morning, was released and made it to number 84 on the RPM charts, but there were no hits.
Sound
band seemed to be at a crossroads. The dynamics within the band were changing. Howie was no longer the sole lead vocalist, with Bill Henderson singing lead on 3 tracks and sharing a lead with Howie on another. The album didn't do as well as their debut. There were a number of possible reasons: lack of record company support, not releasing singles, changing markets, or just choice of material. In the end, Howie remains philosophical about it.
I mean, it's a business, and
Yeah.
they weren't seeing the return, so for them it made sense to, well, we'll pull the plug. I mean, that's how it worked.
They didn't see any hits, I guess,
Well,
or anything they wanted to push as a hit.
no.
I was curious if Vickers was put off by the fact that his role in the band as lyricist was seemingly supplanted by the lyrics from Riga's play.
So the fact is that when we got with the second album, and a lot of the material was coming from me, I wasn't cranking it out, right?
Admitting that he didn't have a batch of lyrics ready to go was key to the band deciding to do the play.
What I'm saying is, if we'd had a stack of, that was as much that we didn't have a lot of stuff ready to go.
You did that project because you didn't have a bunch of material, right?
That was no small part of it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and that was in lieu of, really. But
That's a fair point.
And so timing wise, it was okay. Well, let's do this. Until I left doing what I was doing with them, and started doing jingles, and realized that those round files, what do they call them, wastebaskets, that you could fill those. Nobody's going to know, right?
Yeah.
But you can fill those up. In other words, I was waiting for inspiration, and learned that, well, no, it's mostly perspiration.
Right.
Yeah. So that's because, and there's nothing, that movie Alien?
Yep.
That thing on the face?
Yes.
That's what a creative deadline is like. Yeah? We need this tomorrow. Well, oh, fuck. So away you go.
Yeah.
And that's when I learned to actually write,
Okay.
professionally.
Right. That makes
But
sense.
up until then, it was waiting, whether it's Howard Gray, whatever, this stuff would just come. I woke up, my first, the lyrics aren't that great, but they're what they are, but the looking at a baby, that was just, I woke up and wrote it all out.
Yeah.
So, but that's not how it works. And I learned that eventually, but not till I'd left.
The band were busy during the first part of the year, playing both local gigs and doing a tour of the eastern states during March, hitting Detroit, New York, and Boston. And they were scheduled to appear live in the theatrical premiere of Grass and Wild Strawberries, which ran from April 10th to May 3rd in Vancouver. I wondered what it was like for Howie to perform live as the play was going on.
It was a neat experience.
Yeah.
We were kind of the Greek chorus. We were behind a scrim.
Oh.
I came out and did a couple of solo where it warranted doing a solo thing, so I played that role. But it was a musical, but not like a typical musical where the music came from us live, but as I say, our role was more like a Greek chorus, if you will.
Yeah. 16 of the performances had been completely sold out well before the shows were scheduled to begin. Though well attended, newspaper reviews from back in the day were not kind, particularly referencing the loud rock band. One review referred to the band as a highly overrated rock group. I asked Howie about that, and he was generous.
Well, it wouldn't be what they'd be used to.
No,
for
of
sure.
course not.
It was kind of cool because we actually set a record that never. Well, the Playhouse is gone now, but that was an attendance record that
Really?
they had. They filled the seats for,
that's perfect.
which is what they were trying to do.
In an April 1969 interview, in an ironic foreshadowing, when asked how long the Collectors would be together, both Claire and Howie thought there was no limit. Then came the bombshell. The very next month, in May of 1969, Howie Vickers and the Collectors amicably parted ways. One writer at the time speculated that there was an artistic and musical conflict, with the band wanting to go in a rockier direction. One fact that was clear was the time spent away from home was affecting them all.
Well, yeah, it was for me for sure.
They needed wanted to be away in the States to earn a living, but the toll seemed to be too great.
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah.
For me, it certainly was.
During our conversation, Howie pointed out that the writing was on the wall from the very beginning.
The omen was there from when our first single. That's me, the way it was, the lyrics worked. I do part of a verse and Bill does part of a verse. So right from the start, there was 2 lead vocals, if you will. Right? On that anyway.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a premonition of okay, what was to come. It just came a time where I just, and Bill was more than ready to step in.
Yeah.
Because on Grass and Wild Strawberries, he'd done lead vocals as well,
Yeah.
And it was bang on. I mean, they were more suited to him and whatever. The plus was you get 2 lead vocals out of it,
Yeah.
But as I say, it wasn't a difficult transition in a lot of ways for them to go on with with the 4. And it was, for me, I was never really comfortable.
Once the formal announcement came regarding the split, there were a few loose ends to tie up.
The last show, the last performance I did with the Collectors was with the Vancouver Symphony. And we did the What Love Suite, the 20-minute, whatever it is, long piece with the symphony.
Okay.
And the group that opened, we shared the bill with, was Spring. And they did a composition that Bob Buckley had written, and they performed before we did in that concert, and then we did our thing. So technically, that was the last.
Okay. I guess that other one, that's Zonk thing or something.
Well, it was called, I think they called it that or whatever.
Yeah.
At the concert.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, trying to get.
Yeah.
They want to get kids in the door.
Yes.
CBC did record the suite in the studio, their old studios on Georgia Street, and that is apparently online somewhere.
Without Howie, the Collectors recorded a few National Film Board shorts, soundtrack music for Canada the Land, screened at Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan, and released a couple of singles as the 4-piece Collectors, before coming to the conclusion that a rebranding was in order. The band changed their name to Chilliwack and carried on without Howie. Eventually, the ex-Collectors members started drifting away, and by 1978, Glenn Miller, Claire Lawrence, and Ross Turney had all been replaced. Ironically, it was the new version of Chilliwack that had its greatest success. Howie's plan after leaving the Collectors was to record a solo album. He re-recorded the Collectors song One Act Play and released it as a single.
At that time, we were talking 1970-ish, I think it was 1970. Studio in town, co-owned by Jack Hirschhorn and Tom Northcott, called Studio 3. Yep. So I was kind of on staff there, and One Act, so I was preparing, it never got released, but I was preparing a solo album. And this was perhaps going to be in it.
Okay.
Barry DeBorzon, who co-produced our first 2, maybe 3 singles, 2 anyway, with the Collectors on Valiant Records, he came up and was doing some work at the studio as well. I think Jack probably got him up to do that. Barry produced that, and yeah.
So, were you thinking you wanted to put your own spin on it because you really liked the song?
Well, Barry picked he liked the song,
okay.
and that was his choice.
Oh, I see.
As much as anything, it was, his call. So.
In the early 70s, Vickers got involved with a group of musicians that was more of a party band called the Wild Root Orchestra.
I had more fun with Wild Root. That's the most fun I ever had making music.
Isn't that a lot more rewarding when you can have fun?
Well, that's what it's supposed to be,
I
for
know.
Christ's sake. If music ain't fun, Jesus, don't do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the mid-1970s, Vickers switched gears and got into the advertising business full-time with a company called Griffiths Gibson.
That was the main part of my music career. Was they were friends from when we did shows like they sang background. I did as well with them on the Let's Go show. So we became friends in the mid-'60s.
Okay.
And I was off doing my collector's thing in California, a latter part of the '60s, and they started up a jingle company called Griffiths Gibson. And so when I finished with the collectors in start of 1970, I was freelancing with them and other companies in town, etc. And I just got pulled into that over the years. And in 1976 I started doing jingles, producing, writing, singing on full time. And we did it all at Little Mountain Sound, because Griffiths Gibson, and then it became Griffiths Gibson Ramsey. Miles Ramsey was the third partner, and we all collectively. Bob Buckley was there as a staff arranger producer. We were a team there. As I say, got fully involved in '76 and finished in '95. So I had almost 20 years.
Oh, that's
there,
a long,
right?
yeah.
So that was the bulk of my music career.
Yeah.
This other stuff we're talking about was kind of a relatively short period of time. But then it was actually a career.
Right.
The main thing is you're still writing, but you're actually getting paid for it.
Oh, yeah.
What a concept.
No kidding.
That's
great.
Griffiths Gibson, we were at Little Mountain Sound became, that was the studio that they built, but it became known with all the other groups that came in and recorded there as well, right?
Yeah.
So that was the other claim to fame for the studio itself. But we probably one of the biggest jingle companies in North America. Yeah.
There have been a couple of collectors' reunions over the years. The first was in the early 1990s, organized by local producer legend Bob Rock as a thank you to Children's Hospital.
We reformed for this gig because Bob Rock called each of us up individually and said, would you play this benefit? And I think that's the reason we decided yes, because he appealed to each of us individually. We've been asked over time. There have been all kinds of Vancouver rock revivals, and we've always declined to do that sort of thing.
It's for the Children's Hospital coming up on, we're playing on the 16th at the Town Pump. It's something that Bob put together last year. One of his kids was involved a couple of years ago in a medical situation, and Bob, I think, had a real appreciation for what the Children's Hospital is all about, what it does, and had this fundraiser called Medicine Ball that he put together last year, and that's what he's asked us to be a part of. And really, that's the reason. As Claire says, I think on our own, I don't think we would have done it. I think it was really kind of, this one's for Bob and the kids a little bit, and for ourselves, of course, too. But
so how weird is it now, 25 years later, playing it together?
It's kind of delightful. It's weird in a way, but not weird in a weird way. It's weird that it's just, it's been so long, and we rediscover things that happened 25 years ago that we'd sort of forgotten about. But a lot of it is really delightful because there's very interesting music in there.
Old man sitting in the park there. Is it getting dark there? Can you see? Old man sitting in the doorway. Am I going your way? Can you see? Old man, can you see? I wonder, can you see if I would be an old man sitting in the garden? Of the reason harder.
second reunion happened in May 2010 at the River Rock Casino in Richmond. The occasion was the 40th anniversary of Chilliwack, with Howie, Bill Henderson, and Claire Lawrence reforming as the Collectors, playing shows Friday and Saturday night. I was fortunate enough to be there and reveled in their 6-song opening set. Howie shared his favorite line with me off camera. He said, "People have asked me if we rehearsed for this." I said, "Absolutely we did. Unfortunately, it was 45 years ago." It was fantastic to catch up with Howie and talk about his time in the Collectors. During the course of the interview, I found out that Vickers played trombone in the band, although uncredited on the albums. I was intrigued. Now, as a trombone player...
Oh, don't call me that. I picked it up and blew on it, but yeah.
Was that pretty much just in the classics kind of thing? You did the odd...
Well, I did some of it with the Collectors.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, Claire was, we had Claire playing sax.
Yeah.
And so we do a couple of some horn things, but by and large, mostly that was with the classics. Yeah.
Okay. So if
again, Claire was in the classics.
Yeah.
So, and we were doing, it was cover stuff. We weren't doing original, so it was R&B stuff or whatever that maybe required some horns. So that's what. Yeah.
So you guys were working pretty well together from the get-go, kind of thing, and you were.
Well, Claire and I went back. Yeah, we went back to the classics, as I say, and then that morphed, as it were, into the Collectors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if I listen real close in some of those Collectors, I'll hear you in behind.
Well, hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
No, yeah.
With his self-deprecating sense of humor leading the way, Howie regaled us with fascinating stories and off-the-cuff recitations of his song lyrics, like Real Contender, Uncle Wiggily, Sweetwater, and Things You Didn't Do, which brought a smile to his face.
And Things You Didn't Do, that's a ballad that's on that first album. Thinking about it later, you can't help wondering why it's the things you didn't do that make you cry. Wow. There's some wisdom there.
You're a poet and a scholar.
Well, it's an old, so you learn some shit.
I'd like to thank Howie Vickers for sharing his time and stories with us, and Rob Frith of Neptune Records for facilitating the interview. This has been Noise from the Cranium. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.
All I want is a pillow to lay under my head. I need a rainbow of fire so I can cover my bed. I've got to cover my bed. The cold night of trouble, you know it's such a long night of pain. It will be tomorrow before I see you again.